Yeah. And then we will start with you from the first bunch of questions. Then we'll switch to Alex and end up with Thomas. Okay?
All right, sounds good.
Ты бы предупреждал, что включил-то. Всем привет. Я уже увидел себя в YouTube просто и выключил его. Всем привет, мы начинаем наш ивент. Я начинаю на русском, но когда мы придем к Томасу, мы будем переключаться на английский и вести диалог с ним. Во-первых, я хочу всем сказать, что мы уже провели первый розыгрыш. И везунчик Володя получил от нас плед, просто потому, что зарегистрировался на Community Z. Вот это наш первый розыгрыш. План на сегодня такой. Сейчас у нас будет небольшой разговор с каждым из участников по моим и вашим вопросам. Спасибо тем, кто написал свои вопросы. Их также можно писать в чате во время трансляции. Вторая тема. Потом у нас будет небольшой квиз в Телеграме. Он проведется в нашей Телеграм-группе. Пожалуйста, кто еще не в ней, зайдите. Ссылка есть на YouTube. И в этой Телеграм-группе будет с помощью Телеграм-бота наш небольшой квиз. 10 вопросов про SAP. Нужно сперва подружиться с ботом, поэтому аккуратно надо подружиться с ботом. Сперва и только после этого он допустит вас для участия в квизе. Мы уже неделю назад один проводили. Было достаточно сложно первый раз, второй раз будет нормально. И потом Томас закончит своим разговором про новые идеи от SAP. Все, начинаем. Дима.
Да, я здесь.
Ты готов? Привет.
Здорово.
Рад тебя видеть, во-первых, потому что для тех, кто не знает, именно Дима когда-то 20 лет назад брал меня на работу, сделал из меня специалиста саповского, а потом сказал, что ему все надоело, и он уехал в Москву. Дим, чем ты занимался в Москве?
Ну, как-то так было, да. Да в Москве очень быстро, активно, так 14 лет прожил. Уехал туда, называлось это старший консультант об разработке. Вот, первый проект был в Питере, СПБ, как уж не помню, как назывался, Лентрансгаз на тот момент. Вот, ну и началась карьера, начал строить новую жизнь в новом городе, по новым правилам. Вот, в большой компании, в принципе. И так 14 лет прожил, каждый год, каждые 2-3 года.
Что нужно было там в Москве? Вот эти 14 лет.
Самое главное, да нету главного на самом деле. Наверное, в большей степени soft skills и способность приносить результат в установленные сроки и качественно. Это было, наверное,
технологические какие-то особенные скиллы? По сравнению с Беларусью, в России нужно было что-то другое? Юзер-экзиты там выучить?
Нет, на тот момент, скорее всего, бы не сказал, что они были настолько актуальны. И приходилось, в принципе, рынок очень рос активно, и скупались все подряд, любые ресурсы. И знаешь ты, не знаешь, но главное, чтобы ты смог разобраться с этим. Главное, чтобы ты смог разобраться. И...
Окей, но при этом все равно ты посидел в Москве, собрался и уехал в Польшу.
Да.
Так уже третья, троечка.
Вторая страна, ну как, ну первая Беларусь, конечно.
Беларусь,
ну да, третья, да. Это как есть старое, широко известное выступление Бродского в узких кругах перед студентами какого-то университета, который он рассказывал о том, что называется похвала скуки, о том, как ты в один прекрасный момент просыпаешься, то же самое солнце, те же самые окна, те же самые двери, тот же самый дом. Тебе становится скучно, ты все бросаешь, уезжаешь в другое место, начинаешь все с нуля. Ну, вот как моя история.
И в итоге, вот ты приехал в Польшу, а там что нужно? Какие скиллы? Что ты вот вообще там делаешь сейчас? Вернулся к истокам?
Да, но вернулся к истокам. Конечно же, цель у меня была не столько Польша, сколько сама возможность переезда на рынок в 450 миллионов человек на тот момент. Это более интересно было, да, то есть присоединяя к рынку российскому, белорусскому еще рынок европейский с правом работы, оно как бы очень ценно, на мой взгляд. Вот, а основные скиллзы, те, которые мне пока, безусловно, пришлось вернуться к корням, корням, к АБАПу, просто потому что это было проще с точки зрения софт-скиллзов, с точки зрения коммуникации с людьми. Вот. А все, что потребовалось здесь, ну, во всяком случае, пока, ну, это процентов только 50 того, что нужно было мне в Москве.
А АБАП востребован в Польше?
Ну, пока
Они там
да,
знают
потому
АБАП?
что все-таки... Да, знают АБАП, но нужно понимать положение польского рынка труда на европейском рынке. В любом случае, это, как ни крути, это ресурсный центр. Ресурсный центр, потому что очень крупные производства прямые переезжают в Польшу. Ну и, соответственно, нужны ресурсы, которые будут обеспечивать все, и процессы, и разработку,
к этому-то мы с тобой привыкли.
Да, да, именно так. И нужно понимать, что ты вот садишься на 80%, все равно ресурсный рынок, ты садишься в какие-то определенные задачи, которые распределены по функциональным сферам в SAP, вот, и ты можешь сидеть вечно на самом деле на этом, если ты попадаешь на работу постоянную в штат. Вот. И, ну, с одной стороны, как бы спокойно, а с другой стороны, скучно становится, потому что нету того драйва, нет того риска, там, нет тех челленджей, которые как бы...
Ну, тогда у меня, ты знаешь, два важных вопроса. Вот первый, наверное, всех волнует. Как будет деблокировать транспортный запрос по-польски? Релиз транспорт реквест.
Звольнить реквест. Звольнить реквест.
А транспортный забыл?
Транспортовый, не wiem. Не знаю. В общем, здесь проблема, да, проблема вся та же, потому что я-то SAP начинал учить с небезызвестным Володей Осипенко, вернее, под его руководством. И на русском языке это очень плохо было. Плохо было. Мы всегда использовали английский язык. И первый проект был англоязычный. И это, на самом деле, была большая для меня проблема в России, потому что SAP по-русски я знаю с трудом, на самом деле, особенно в техническую часть. Но потом потихоньку выучил. А здесь и в Польше тоже SAP на польском языке практически не существует, если не брать каких-то конечных заказчиков, там, где требуется интерфейс польский. Все люди используют польские глаголы, но термины, как ни крути, в большинстве это английские, либо немецкие.
А сейчас вот вы на польском языке заходите в систему когда-нибудь? Он вообще есть у вас в системе?
Слушай, я знаю японский, есть китайский, я даже когда текстовые элементы переводил на японский, да, а вот на польский, ну, конечно же, есть, да, помнишь такой термин?
Да, помню. Ну и смотри, вот последний, наверное, важный вопрос. У нас сейчас довольно много людей собирается в Польшу. 3 каких-то главных совета для тех вот саперов, которые собрались в Польшу. Есть какие-то такие бытово-саперные?
Да, основной, как-то мы проводили встречу с белорусами местными. Первый основной совет, что бы вам ни говорили, что бы вы ни делали, вы должны понимать, что это же на самом деле не только Польша, вообще рынка Евросоюза. Самое главное – документы, самое главное – легализация, то, что называется польский побыт. Потому что по сравнению с Беларусью, с Россией, ребят, работа на самом деле как грязи. Конечно, нужно побиться, но там месяц-два на поиск на самом деле, если ты приезжаешь вообще с пустым чемоданом. Поэтому основная задача – легализация. В целом я как бы и решал эту задачу последние 2,5 года. И решил успешно, но она ключевая. Сейчас же, все по-другому. Потом, конечно же, нужно быть готовым к изучению польского языка, потому что страна пребывания, это касается любой страны, а вопрос общения, вопрос, как быстро ты сможешь влиться в этот социум, он зависит от культуры, традиций и языка. То есть это лучше заранее хотя бы понимать, что, о чем идет речь, почему так шутят. Вот. Это второе, наверное. А третье, я бы дал, наверное, совет: нужно двигаться. Нужно ехать, двигаться и не бояться, и не думать.
Ну вот и тогда следующий вопрос. Куда дальше? Самый-самый последний.
Я на самом деле... Сначала мне, конечно... Что я хочу сказать? Хорошо бы сидеть на доходах европейских, немецких, голландских, но находиться в налоговой системе польской, потому что налоги гораздо ниже. А законы те же практически, и свобода, демократия, там, бла-бла, и все это такое. Вот. И с точки зрения вхождения в социум, белорусам, белорусам, русским гораздо будет, наверное, проще, потому что еда близко, ценности близкие, ну, со своими, конечно, прибабахами, безусловно. Вот. А так я рассматривал вариант Швейцарии, Люксембурга, и вот в последнее время у меня почему-то запала Ирландия. Вот. Наверное, скорее всего, больше связано с языком, на котором будут дети учиться. Английский все-таки, как ни крути, он универсальный. Единственное, что там плохо, говорят, погода не очень хорошая. Все серое, мрачное, а так замечательно. Не знаю как. Я на самом деле в раздумьях, врать не буду. Я
Завистники
в раздумьях.
врут.
Да,
Спасибо,
да.
Дима, интересно все эти истории такие житейские. Ну что ж, переключимся к Саше.
Приветствую всем.
Привет, я надеюсь, ты вышел на трансляцию.
Да,
Наш
да,
режиссер тебя перевел. Да? Ты себя смотришь параллельно?
Ну
Вот
да.
ты в узком кругу известен как человек, который больше всех посмотрел Open SAP курсов. Наверное, в мире. Я не знаю. Вот у меня первый вопрос. Какой последний курс ты посмотрел?
Deploy Fiori Applications, что-то там как-то так. Вот сейчас как раз его еще смотрю. Тут даже образовалась очередь, 15 курсов, вот еще не досмотрел, а так, да, вот если исключить неинтересные, можно сказать, 15 курсов и будут все просмотрены мной.
Очереди.
Да.
А скажи, какой самый интересный? Тот Open SAP курс, который повлиял на тебя максимально?
Самый интересный смотрел недавно, я название не помню, но как-то называется он Business Technology Platform. Мне очень понравилось, как SAP коротко собрал видео, все самые интересные ключевые сообщения из 2 последних теххедов, и именно в этом курсе как бы все трендовые технологии собраны в одном месте. То есть мне он, в принципе, очень понравился, и мне даже...
Как еще раз? Я запишу. В чат брошу.
Я сейчас...
Business Technology. Потом бросай, ладно.
Я сейчас даже много кому скидываю ссылки, то есть вот участвуя на пресейлах, то есть он даже помогает именно короткие видео оттуда просто sales-менеджерам, аккаунт-менеджерам объяснить вообще ключевые вещи в SAP-трендах.
Окей, и вот смотри, ты
CTO
посмотрел...
SAP.
Круто, и вот ты посмотрел кучу этих курсов, и вот исходя из твоего опыта, исходя из твоих знаний, на чем сейчас надо фокусироваться вот современным инженерам?
Ну, конечно,
Куда
это
расти?
cloud. Это cloud, это Cloud Application Programming Model, RESTful ABAP. Это все, что касается фронтенда нового, то есть понимать принципы, как можно строить Fiori и не Fiori приложения. То есть это Freestyle, Fiori Elements. То есть, конечно, это все-таки cloud. То есть сейчас огромное количество запросов, и большинство они связаны все с клаудной разработкой.
Так а что абаперу делать? Бросать все? Или абап в клауде?
Нет, ABAP в клауде тоже работает, но порог входа в знание в Cloud Application Programming Model, он, в принципе, довольно низкий, и в любом случае люди, знающие ABAP, они без работы не останутся, потому что растет просто рынок SAP, то есть нужно больше и больше скиллов, и в ближайшие 5 лет рынок точно останется таким же, а то еще и вырастет. Но с приходом S4HANA On-Premise новой, S4HANA Cloud, конечно, нужно больше и больше понимать Fiori, ABAP for Fiori, либо RESTful ABAP, без этого уже никак. И все новые запросы, они приходят именно только со знанием вот этого. Естественно, если вы знаете еще JavaScript, то вы, конечно, сможете делать простые правки также в фронтенд приложениях. Но нужно хотя бы понимать тренды и адаптироваться. То есть много технологий, в них трудно разобраться, но не обязательно их знать все. Главное понимать хотя бы куда идет, какие тренды есть, для того, чтобы вовремя дальше понять, где что почитать.
Окей. И вот еще тогда вопрос. Вот ты очень уважаемый архитект в саповской среде.
Спасибо.
Что такое архитект? Что это вообще такое? Что отличает его от инженера и что он должен знать поверх обычных инженерных скиллов?
Ну, в первую очередь, это очень много коммуникаций. То есть вы должны быть готовы коммуницировать. Чтобы быть архитектом, нужно знать тренды, понимать, какие технологии появляются, какие сейчас лучше, какие хуже. Но это больше знание трендов и понимание направления движения основных векторов. Конечно, нужно иметь большой кругозор технологический, то есть недостаточно понимать только, как работает ABAP, к примеру. То есть этого недостаточно, потому что архитектор больше всего, он работает на стыке технологий, и в основном это интеграции все различные между разными системами. То есть в большести своей это хороший кругозор должен быть технологически, коммуникация, коммуникационный навык, терпение, то есть это иногда очень сложно объяснять, потому что люди тебя не понимают, и многие вещи нужно говорить по 5-10 раз, прежде чем как бы вы выйдете на общую линию, где вы понимаете правильно друг друга. Ну и всегда учиться, то есть здесь нет предела совершенства, то есть всегда, конечно, учиться.
Окей.
Чему-то новому.
Ну, классно. Самый последний вопрос тебе. Никуда не собираешься?
Пока что нет, но мысли как бы есть, но именно в ближайшее время нет, не собираюсь.
Ну, классно. Спасибо,
Курс я
Саша.
скинул в чат, да. Курс в чате, который мы говорили.
В ютубовском.
Да, в ютубовском.
Классно. Спасибо, Саша. Thomas, finally, it's
Yes.
Томас Юнг. Yeah.
Hi there.
Yeah, hello. Thomas, first of all, many thanks for coming to our event. That's really, I mean, at least I personally consider you as a kind of teacher for me. Yeah. Because like 14 years ago, your book was the first I read in SAP space, and I got the most of my SAP knowledge from your book, the first version, by the way. And then I read the second. And then the trainings from SAP, from OpenSAP, which you hold together with Rich. But then the question to you, when will we read the next book from Tomas Юнг?
Book? Probably never. Because it takes so long to produce a book, and it feels like in today's world that information is then out of date. It's 9 months to a year to produce a book, and now you can put out weekly videos and blog posts and things like that and get the same information out there sooner. So I think a book is obviously a nice collection of information to have, but for me personally, as an author, I'd rather put my efforts towards other channels and the accessibility that they provide in a quicker fashion.
Like this one.
Yeah.
And your title says at the moment that you are a developer's advocate, which is, by the way, being advocate in Belarus is a bit dangerous at the moment. But thanks for coming to the Belarusian event or Russian speaking event. But the question, what it's all about? What are you advocating?
Yeah, so the developer advocacy team, it was formerly known as developer relations. The name has maybe changed over the years a couple of times, but the goal is the same. It's a team of, we're developers ourselves, but we're developers that in our past have enjoyed writing and posting blog posts and creating learning materials and such. And now our full-time job is to do that, basically, to look at the individual developer. So we're not creating content for particular companies or a particular segment. We're really trying to speak to the individual developer and help them with what they need, help them expose them to new technologies and concepts, give them the enablement content to be able to get started with those new things and understand best practices and whatever they need to get their job done, right? The advocacy part of it is we also want to listen and be your advocate within SAP. So we do as much. It was easier when we did in-person events. You get to chat with people in person at the event, but even in all this virtual event world, we take the feedback that we hear, the kinds of questions that we get from the audience, concerns from the developer community, and we bring those back into the teams at SAP who are building the programming models and the development tools and the technologies that everyone's using, and hopefully affect good change to improve the developer experience by bringing that feedback into SAP.
Okay, so if we need the feature, we should address this to you, and you would advocate this to the development team of HANA or ABAP or whatever.
Yeah, we could help. I mean, obviously we have mechanisms for like individual development features. I want this syntax, we have the influence site and things like that. But yeah, we try to be the voice of the external developer within SAP.
And then an obvious question from our side. Is it only for developers? If I'm S/4HANA finance consultant, do I also have advocate in your team?
Not on my team. My team is developer advocates. We only look after developers. I would say there is, I don't know if there's an equivalent exactly for other teams. I mean, we always have, in the product areas, we have product managers for the different business applications, and sometimes they play some similar role of advocacy. But we thought for developers are so key to adoption of new technology. If you can convince the individual developer to try out a new technology, then they will become the champion for that technology within their company, right? Or within their customers that they're working with, if they're a partner or consultant. So that's why we felt it was so important to address the developer persona specifically, that we set aside a whole separate team to do just that.
Okay, and how many people do you have on your team?
There are 8 of us. We are not a huge team. That's counting myself as the manager of the team, but we are spread out. A little bit spread out. There are 3 of us in the United States. There's 1 in the UK, 3 in Germany, and 1 in Poland. But we try to be a multiplier, right? We can't write and know about every SAP technology, but that's why we focus on the emerging ones, and like I said, try to be a multiplier also for the content that comes out of the product groups at SAP. A lot of what we do is social media and broadcasting, and just pointing people to where they can find more information about certain topics, making them aware of something, and then send you to a tutorial or course or whatever to get deeper learning.
Yeah, good. And we have a lot of questions came through the community, that platform, to you, and most of them are from our champ Vyacheslav. He is from Abakan. While you Google where Abakan is, which is somewhere in the middle of Russia. The one question I really liked, so he asked you are considered the kind of teacher for many of us, but who would you consider as your teacher? Who taught you SAP?
Oh, I've had a couple of teachers over the years. Brian McKellar comes to mind, co-author on the first book that I did, but I learned so much from Brian, and worked with him at a time when I worked for a customer. I did before I came to work for SAP. I worked at a customer like many of our audience here, I'm sure. And Brian worked at SAP and was a really great mentor for me. Brian's not real active these days, but in the early days of the SAP Developer Network, he really got things started in the ABAP area. He was the development manager and chief architect of BSP. Some of you may remember that technology. So he was really pushing the ABAP technology into the web space, the whole ICM framework and stuff like that. He was an early advocate for that. I've had lots of other teachers, and it's funny because it probably meant more technical, but when I think of teachers, I think of people, maybe somebody that I had that was a great manager that helped me grow, that, maybe didn't teach me technology things, but made it possible for me to learn technology. I've had some great managers and organizational leaders over the years. I've attended some great SAP courses as well. I still remember the instructor of my very first ABAP course that I went to, what is it now? Is it BC 400 now? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the code was back then, because it was different codes then. But the introduction to ABAP course that I took almost 25 years ago or so, I still remember that instructor and the things he taught me, and the fact that I crashed the server on the second day. But yeah, I've had great opportunities over the years.
And this first training, did you have it in Germany or in the United States?
No, it was in the United States. I took it in Chicago, actually. My very first business trip ever. I was fresh out of university, had just started with a company, and just a couple of weeks on the job, they sent me to ABAP training. The training was in Chicago. It was the training in the U.S. was a couple years old that they had been training in the U.S. And they had a couple of spots you could go to, Philadelphia or Chicago or Atlanta, I think, to get training in those days.
Yeah, great. And another one. Basically, this question I asked Alexander before, but I think also it would be good to have your opinion. There are quite a few people now titling SAP architect.
Mm-hmm.
What should be behind this title? What kind of skills someone should have on top of his engineering skills to be a real SAP architect?
Oh, the skills for an architect. First and foremost, communication skills. Because no matter how great your ideas are about the architecture, if you can't communicate those to both technical and non-technical people, then it doesn't really matter. And I think the best architects are the ones that can also sell those ideas to the people writing the checks, right, and paying the bills, that maybe don't understand all the technology, but you have to be able to explain the business benefits of those technology and the impact. So that's first and foremost. Then I would say, to be a good technical architect, you have to have just such a broad range of knowledge these days. You have to be the one as the architect kind of dragging development teams and system admins into new worlds, right? Whether that's into the cloud, or even once you get into the cloud, there's open source capabilities. We see emerging new runtimes. If we look at the SAP Cloud Platform, the days when there's just one technology, one runtime. Now we have ABAP there. We got Cloud Foundry. We've got serverless emerging. We got Kubernetes. You've got to understand the technology of the SAP world. You've got to understand the tech trends that are happening outside of SAP, because they're probably going to impact the SAP world before too long. And you've got to be able to put it all together. And it's just an overwhelming amount of constant learning. So you've got to have a broad knowledge. You got to love learning, because you're going to be doing it constantly. The technology moves at a pace. I mean, when I started with ABAP years ago, the technology pace was just much slower. We'd have a release once a year or something like that, and there wasn't this huge drastic architectural changes every couple of years. Now with the cloud, things just move at an incredible pace.
Can I joke, Dmitry?
Yeah.
Thomas, looks like you understand the Russian, just because I've said exactly the same.
Nope, I really don't. That just reinforces the impact of the response, doesn't it? That we came to those conclusions independently.
Okay, and we have a lot of questions came to my Excel sheet at the moment. Maybe another one from Abakan. Yeah. What would be with ABAP in 10 years? It is going to be ABAP in 10 years?
Yeah, there'll definitely still be an ABAP in 10 years. there's no matter what happens in the technology space, SAP has such an investment. Us and our customers and partners have such an investment in intellectual property that's implemented in ABAP that it only makes sense to continue to invest and modernize ABAP to keep that investment in the business logic and IP that runs on top of it going. And you see that kind of modern investment with moving ABAP to the cloud, and in doing so, trying to jettison some of the older constructs of the ABAP development environment and language that are a little long in the tooth and probably should have gone a while ago, but embracing, Fiori development, everything that we see with the RESTful application programming model, the RAP, to modernize the whole transactional flow, the embracing of HANA as the persistence and the things that brings to the table to combine analytics together with transactional. I mean, ABAP will continue to evolve, and sort of the beauty of ABAP is it also is still ABAP. I mean, for the most part, the syntax that you used 20 plus years ago still works, and you bring those skill sets forward, and that protects, like I said, the intellectual property, the business logic that is invested in that area, and it protects the core of our knowledge base of our ABAP developers, but yet gives them a way to bring applications into a modern cloud, more scalable environment, things like that. So as long as we continue to evolve ABAP in those directions, it will stick around. Now, that doesn't mean as ABAP developers, we can stick our heads in the sand and ignore what's going on the outside. I think I mentioned in the chat earlier, the best ABAP developers are those that also know some things from other development environments, other languages, other concepts, can bring the best of those other worlds, what you learn from, say, doing Node or Java development or something like that, bring that back into the ABAP environment, the patterns, the best practices, bring that back into the ABAP world, like we've done with like unit testing and things like that. Those are heavily influenced from other environments, and that makes ABAP better as well. So, I always encourage people, ABAP's going to stay around. Your investment in it is good, but don't only invest in it when it comes to your personal skill sets.
Okay, but what then the second investment, personal investment, I mean, for the people? ABAP is fine, but what else? What should be the second choice?
I think you've got a couple of really good options right off the top. And I usually encourage people, well, what is your kind of interest? Yeah, I mean, do you enjoy doing UI development, for instance? And then I suggest people really invest in Fiori, learn some JavaScript, because even if you're doing Fiori, Freestyle UI5 is probably not far behind. And it's good to have some JavaScript front end, know some stuff about design and HTML5. That's a valuable area to invest in. The other area that I tell people to look at, because it's closely related and not that far away from the ABAP world conceptually, is the cloud application programming model. And I usually tell ABAP developers to start with the Node side rather than the Java side. I think that JavaScript and Node.js development in general, although different than ABAP syntactically and from a runtime standpoint, is a closer cousin, if you will, to ABAP than Java is. But that's a matter of opinion. I think that's a good place. And those are things that you can do and be closely related to your ABAP development, leverage in SAP implementations, but also open you up to a whole different world of concepts and ways of doing things and opportunities if you ever want to move beyond the SAP space as well.
There is another question from two people, by the way. The ABAP RESTful programming model is already available and part of S4. Mm-hmm. Would you recommend to move from the previous paradigm from BOPF, CDS to this new one, or just wait a couple of years while SAP invents something new? Do you maybe already have some insight on this?
Well, I wouldn't assume that there's that there's something new beyond that to wait for. I don't have a crystal ball either, and who knows, 2 years from now, maybe we do decide to do something completely different. But I can tell you, inside of SAP, it's not like we're planning for the next thing beyond the RESTful programming model right now. There's a heavy investment in our own application development teams and getting up to speed on the RAP and using that for at least new development. I think if I was in the shoes of a S4 on-premise developer in particular, and I was on 1909 or 2020, so I have access to a pretty good full range of the RAP capabilities, and I was doing some new development from scratch. I had a new project that landed on my desk, and it was, it's got its own data model and stuff like that. I would definitely do that in RAP today. Mm-hmm. If I'm making some enhancements to something existing, I maybe would not immediately assume that everything has to be rewritten in RAP on day one. I mean, that's part of the reason also why we have managed and unmanaged. The unmanaged version of RAP lets you take existing logic, either BOF objects or even older RFC BAPIs and stuff like that, and then just kind of wrap around them. So there are on-ramps, if you will, to bringing RAP into your organization. But I think what we see, the state of it, particularly in S4 2020, the latest release that came out, RAP is pretty full featured. And 2 years ago when it first started coming out, there was still a lot of investment to be made to get it to a maturity point. I think it's reaching that point of maturity where I would seriously consider it for most of my new development these days.
Okay, so it's a good point. And maybe at least for technical people like we are, you are one of probably the most famous sappers in the United States, like Bill McDermott and you know, and Rich. Okay, but then the question, still the company is German. Sprechen Sie Deutsch?
No, I don't.
And have you ever worked in Germany in headquarters?
Not for more than like 3 weeks at a time. Not an extended period of time. Just business trips there.
Okay, so you really achieved this kind of achieved this status, yeah, always being in the United States.
Yeah. My whole time working for SAP, I've always been a U.S. employee.
Yeah, great.
I mean, SAP is a German company, but it's also an international company.
It is, but we all know how it works.
Yeah. Getting to travel to Waldorf from time to time is important. It's SAP is very much an organization of who you know, and the personal relationships are very important. Even from the outside, people probably know that if you've met somebody in an event and gotten to know them, that's an important thing in that network in that SAP world. And luckily enough, I've been around enough years and had chances to go to plenty of events and go to headquarters from time to time. I've made plenty of good contacts.
Yeah. And maybe the last question for now, because we're going to have the quiz in a couple of minutes. The question I asked also the previous speakers: do you have any plans for relocation? And why I'm asking, you probably know. It's not really relevant for you, but it's the question of today's event.
I don't have any plans for any relocation. I like where I live. I live in a small farming community in the middle of nowhere, but I have fiber internet to my house. It's the best of both worlds. Okay,
and what state you live?
I live in Indiana.
In Indiana?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, small farming community, 10,000 people in my city, no traffic, no crime, no pollution. Very nice. In the middle of a forest. Yeah.
Great. And many thanks, Thomas, for your time. And I will switch to Russian now, sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Друзья, сейчас у нас будет квиз. Ссылка на нашу телеграм-группу, она есть под YouTube, под YouTube-трансляцией. Там есть ссылка на группу. Надо подружиться с ботом, если вы хотите участвовать в квизе. Я буду шарить экран, но вы все равно должны будете отвечать на эти вопросы до меня. У нас небольшая задержка, около 30 секунд. Вот. А после квиза будет выступление Томаса про Business Application Studio. Так, ну что, сейчас подумаю, как это организовать. Так. Я вижу, много людей зашли уже в нашу группу. Сейчас я запущу туда бота. Дам вам еще 30 секунд зайти. И потом я отправлю в группу наш квиз. Я напомню, здесь 10 вопросов на обдумывание 30 секунд. Просьба не читить и не гуглить. Мне кажется, это будет честно. Ну что ж, отправляю в группу. Все, кто хотят участвовать, должны будут нажать на кнопку «Пройти тест». Вижу, что уже 10 человек. Сейчас люди подключатся, и я начну шарить экран. Наверное, он виден.
Уже да.
Но что-то он все равно не начинается. Из-за людей, которые вовремя не подключились, надо, наверное, еще раз его отправить. Друзья, я вот хочу за это извиниться. Вот я, насколько понимаю эту систему в Телеграме, к сожалению, мы ее недавно только изобрели. До тех пор, пока вы будете жать на вот эти кнопку первый раз, если вы ни разу еще не дружили с квиз-ботом, он будет срывать начало. Поэтому, наверное, надо уже остановиться новым людям и принять, что в квиз будут участвовать только те, кто уже нажал на кнопку.
Не получится так, видимо.
Наверное, не получится. Пока
Слишком много
квиз
людей
стартуется. Саша, расскажи тогда, пока что мы не будем. Ты можешь пока тоже включить камеру. У нас тут есть еще несколько вопросов, которые были адресованы любому спикеру. В частности, очень много от Вячеслава Ермакова, который выиграл наш прошлый квиз. Вот. И один из них: куда делся SAP Leonardo? Вот ты, наверное, знаешь.
Он интегрировался с платформой Data Intelligence по одной основной причине, то что очень трудно было адаптировать эти модели заказчикам, то есть заказчикам нужна большая flexibility при использовании машин-лернинга. То есть он по-прежнему существует, но его теперь активное использование происходит совместно с таким продуктом Data Intelligence. Это зонтик, umbrella для многих продуктов, и в него входит основной продукт Data Hub. И именно в нем теперь имплементируются все красивые сценарии, во-первых, как capability data платформы, в том числе и machine learning и prediction именно используются там.
Круто, спасибо. А тем временем у нас стартанул квиз. Я надеюсь, он сейчас виден на экране. И вот первый вопрос у нас. Сейчас ребята его увидят. Вы меня увидите с небольшой задержкой через 30 секунд. У нас уже 52 ответа на первый вопрос. Для тех, кто слышит, вот, прекрасно. Какой футбольный клуб у нас работает с SAP больше всего? Ну, конечно, Бавария. А следующий вопрос у нас. Как называется саповское решение для дата-сайентистов? Тоже, мне кажется, очень интересный вопрос. Оно в последнее время много всплывает у нас в проектах и пресейлах. И мне кажется, в скором времени станет очень модным и важным решением. 50 человек. У нас очень большая конкуренция сегодня. Да, SAP Data Intelligence. В этом году был запланирован SAP Ariba Live как раз перед локдауном. Где он обычно проходит? Прошел, насколько я знаю, он все равно онлайн, его отменили. Но обычно он проходит именно в этом замечательном городе. В Лас-Вегасе. Вот тоже хороший вопрос, мой любимый. Что такое SAP IO? Да, это стартап-акселератор. У них достаточно много достаточно успешных продуктов. Вот основная проблема бизнес-workflow в SAP всегда была в том, что работать с workflow, менять его, могли только девелоперы. Это делалось в девелопмент-системе, требовало огромного эфорта, занимало по полгода, и поэтому все боялись его трогать. И вот, наконец, в S4 пришло что-то наверх, что позволяет и бизнес-пользователям менять что-то в workflow. И вот как называется вот эта надстроечка? Она называется SAP Flexible Workflow. Томас, я надеюсь, он нас до сих пор видит. Но свою книгу он писал не один, а вместе с вот этим замечательным джентльменом. С кем? Да, Рич Хальман. Что пришло на смену SAP Web IDE? И это, к слову сказать, тема сегодняшнего тока от Томаса. Ну, многие. SAP Business Application Studio. Интересный вопрос на историю, на знание истории. SAP находится в Вальдорфе, но город при этом известен не только SAP, а еще чем-то. Вернее, кем-то. Очень известный, очень крутой основатель очень крутой династии родился тоже в этом городке, уехал в Америку и там стал очень богатым. Вопрос только кто? Нет, это не Рокфеллер, это Астор. Оттуда и гостиница Астории, которая, кстати, есть и в Вальдорфе тоже. Насколько большой SAP? Сколько там людей работает? При этом вот эта цифра, она держится уже несколько лет. Она не растет, но и не падает. Ну вот, около 100 тысяч человек. Вот сейчас тоже интересный вопрос. Вот здесь вот скрыта какая-то цифра. SAP занял первое место в рейтинге Glassdoor технических IT-компаний. А какой процент сотрудников поддерживает CEO? Есть еще такой у них показатель, сколько сотрудников поддерживает SEO компании. И там интересная, близкая белорусам цифра. И чтобы не быть голословным, я даже, наверное, докажу эту цифру. 97%, действительно. Вот у нас Instagram-пост, из которого я взял, вот докажу, из которого я взял вот данную статистику. И что мы имеем? Серж 401. Ну, я поздравляю, Сергей. Дима Антонович, молодец. Ну, видишь, я поздравляю. Мы свяжемся с победителями и обсудим, как мы вручим подарки. У нас крутые подарки, какие-то доступны удаленно, какие-то недоступны, поэтому придется как-то на удаленные, но тем не менее всех поздравляю, спасибо большое. И сейчас мы переключимся на Томаса, и он расскажет про Business Application Studio. Томас, microphone is yours, if you are still here.
I'm still here.
Yeah.
Let me.
So it's time for your talk now.
All right. Give me a second to.
А для всех вы все еще можете, Томас, вы все еще можете задавать вопросы и по теме Томаса, и в принципе в конце мы их постараемся, ну, по возможности, много вопросов озвучить. Томас ответит, и потом Томас, наверное, выберет лучший вопрос в течение всей сессии сегодня, и мы вручим тоже приз. Томас, at the end of the session, we're gonna have Q&A session again, and then you can select the best question for the whole day, the question of the day by Thomas, and we will give a prize to the one who invented the question.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so for today's session, I wanted to give everybody an introduction, overview to the Business Application Studio. I have no slides. In our role as developer advocacy, we try to, instead of showing a lot of slides or things like that, do everything in the system. So as I demonstrate the capabilities and benefits of the Business Application Studio, we're just going to do it by going into the tool. So I hope everybody, it looks like on the live stream, my desktop's coming across just fine. So that's good. I might move some stuff around here so I can see better. So first of all, if anybody wants to try out the Business Application Studio and you haven't started using it yet, then I strongly recommend going to the SAP Cloud platform and signing up for a free trial account. This will give you access to the Business Application Studio, and it lets you create 2 dev spaces, which we're going to talk about what dev spaces are in here in just a minute. But and it only lets one of them be running at a time. So it has some limitations, obviously, because we also sell access to the Business Application Studio. But for an individual developer going through tutorials, learning about either the Business Application Studio directly or using it to learn about other development capabilities in the cloud platform, such as CAP development or Fiori development or mobile development, it is a great way to go. And full featured when it comes to those development environments in the trial version as well. So I'll show you just a little bit about how to get started here. If you've not done it, I am in my trial account. And if you sign up for a trial account, you should automatically have access to the Business Application Studio. You can check this if you go into your sub-account level. And just real quick, you shouldn't need to make any changes here, but if you have any problems, you can always go to the entitlements section, and this will show you all the services that you have access to in your trial account. And this comes up here. What you should see, let's see, I think it's down here under SAP. Yeah, SAP Business Application Studio trial. You should have that subscription already in your account. Early on, when we first enabled the trial, back in March timeframe. Existing accounts did not have that entitlement, and then you would have to come in here and click configure entitlement and add it manually. By now, everybody should have that in their account. The other thing that you have to do once you have the entitlement is you have to go into the subscriptions section, and you will see there is a subscription for SAP Business Application Studio. And like these ones, when you first come in here, it would be not subscribed, and you would have to enable it. So you would have a little button there to enable the subscription. I have already enabled the subscription from the Business Application Studio. And this is also how you can launch into the Business Application Studio. Let's go to my other tab. If I click that, it's going to open up the starting point of the Business Application Studio. Or if you come into the trial itself, we've also on the trial homepage now, we have changed the link that used to, what comes up here, used to be a link to the SAP Web IDE. No longer. It now takes you to the SAP Business Application Studio directly from the homepage, and that's an important distinction. The fact that we've removed the Web IDE from the trial and replaced it with the Business Application Studio should be a clear indication that that SAP's direction is to switch over. Already, all new development in the Web IDE has stopped, and all development goes into the Business Application Studio. We've been working hard to bring over all the existing development scenarios from the Web IDE. I think the only major one that we're still missing is actually the HANA development scenario, at least the full HANA development scenario with like calculation views and all the HANA specific editors. That was coming soon. I've actually seen it on our internal systems already. It's looking pretty good, and our plan is to deliver that by the end of this calendar year. So within the next couple of months. That's a roadmap statement. It's planned, but so it could slip, whatever. So don't hold me to that. But the progress has been good on it, and that should be the last major scenario that we're missing from the Business Application Studio. And then it's really poised to be the new browser-based development environment for all of the same things that we had in the Web IDE. But let's talk for a minute about exactly what the Business Application Studio is. First of all, it is browser-based, right? So no local installation, no setup on your local desktop. Just put a URL into a web browser and off you go. All the development is done in the cloud, and the entire environment is configured and provided for you by SAP. So unlike, say, local development, where you not only have to install an IDE, whether that's like Eclipse or VS Code or something like that, then you probably need to install a set of extensions, and then you need some other local tools. Like with VS Code development, in addition to VS Code, you probably need a Node runtime and maybe a package manager and a handful of command line tools. The idea of the Business Application Studio is SAP has provided all of that for you, hosted in the cloud. So if you have a lockdown corporate environment, if you have a low power development machine, sometimes when I'm traveling, I just take a Chromebook with me and I don't carry my whole full Windows laptop, and I can still do development because I can open a web browser and connect and do all my development on the server side here. The concept of dev space is important. It's obviously our starting point here. Dev spaces let you choose one of several major development scenarios, and then it controls what tools are set up in your development environment. So if I were to come here and create a new dev space, you see the major choices here of Fiori development, cloud business application development. That would be the primarily the cloud application programming model based development. Then you see mobile services, and then you just see basic, which like doesn't configure very much by default, and you can pick and choose different things to add in here. And in the near future, as I said, we plan to bring the HANA scenario in here, and that would be another major dev space option for HANA native development. And then you would see tools like calculation view editor and things like that over here in the extensions. Use view development. There are certain tools that will automatically get installed and be required. You know, for instance, the Fiori Freestyle tools, the UI5 adaptation project, all the MTA tools. But then you can pick and choose other additional tools that you might want to install as well. You know, for instance, if I'm going to do Fiori development, but if I'm going to do it on top of cloud application programming model services, and work with annotations from there, as opposed to maybe connecting to an ABAP system and consuming RAP or gateway OData services, then I might want to install this additional extension. And configuring your development environment is simply a matter of choosing the tools that you want to add, and then say creating dev space. And SAP, upon creation of the dev space, will install all these tools into your environment and keep them up to date automatically as well. So as new versions of the tools come out and they're available for the Business Application Studio, they'll automatically be pushed into your development space. So you don't have to worry about also having to keep all your stuff up to date and configuring it and stuff like that. So it really takes a lot of the burden off the individual developer. Now, a very recent feature that we added, I've already started my dev space, but if I were to stop it, which I'm not going to do here because I don't want us to have to wait while it stops and restarts, because I've got this one ready to do the rest of my demo today. But if I were to stop it, then I would be able to edit the dev space as well, and then pick and choose the tools again, just like I did on the initial creation. Now, the other thing that we want to do in the near future, this is also a planned roadmap statement. Today, when you choose between, say, Fiori and cloud platform mobile services, there are obviously some basic tools here that are only available in that specific dev space. But what happens if I have a dev space that I started as Fiori, and then I decide that I want to do mobile development as well? Today, you can't easily mix major scenarios together into one dev space. Our suggestion would be use Git to manage your source code and actually clone your project into 2 dev spaces and switch back and forth between the 2 dev spaces. But in the future, we want to make it possible to pull major scenarios from other dev space types into your dev space after the fact as well, similar to the way that we allow the editing of extensions after the fact. And you'll just have to stop your dev space, edit it, and then restart it. But let's go ahead and launch this dev space. I've created one the other day for cloud application programming model development. And as I said, I've already prepared some demo content, a project and everything in there, but we'll see what the development experience is like. So I'll just go ahead and launch this. And as it starts up, what you're going to see visually is a very similar development environment to Microsoft Visual Studio Code. In fact, for the start here, let me just go ahead and pull both tools up side by side here. And it's going to be a little small on the screen here. I'm going to have to scrunch things up just a little bit to get them both on, but I think you're going to be able to see. In fact, let me open a workspace here as well. So, but what you're going to see is the navigation paradigms, the overall capabilities of the development environment. You know, the idea of this left-hand navigation pane to switch here between different capabilities like the Explorer or the Git panel or debugging icons are slightly different, but the capabilities here are the same. The layout of the way that they work are essentially the same. Both have the capability to run a terminal in place. That's really important. We'll come back to that in a second. Both have the same sort of editing experience when it comes to the overall Explorer navigation, all the way down to individual editor types. Even, if I would come here and I would open a close up some of these, come here and open a, that's interesting. Oh, there I'm in the wrong folder. I want to be in my schema folder. Let's just open a CAP CDS file. We have syntax highlighting, code completion, and capabilities like that. And it's going to be the same thing here. Let me just open the same one here in the Visual Studio Code. Same sort of capabilities, same outline, same ability to also open this in the service modeler. That's a very similar development experience overall in both environments. They are based on the same core design principles and the same core logic. The Business Application Studio itself is built on Eclipse Thea, which is basically a browser-based version using Electron, very similar to what Microsoft has done to deliver VS Code on a desktop environment. So if you're working today in Visual Studio Code, I think you'll feel right at home in the Business Application Studio. Or if you start in the Business Application Studio and then also want to do development environments. So I think that's one of the big advantages here. You'll, as I pointed out, like here, I brought up the Cloud Application Programming Model and the CDS editor, and we've got things like the Service Modeler here. These are obviously not, nice, unexpected error. Okay, I saw that I'm getting disconnected here. I don't know if I'm having some network problems. Hopefully the stream's working okay. It's kind of bouncing back and forth. Oh, well, at least I consistently got an unexpected error on VS Code as well as in the Business Application Studio. That's not exactly what I wanted to demo there, but it does serve the point that we're getting the same experience in both environments. In that case, not the experience we want, but consistent nonetheless. They may have something wrong with my model here. I mean, it is showing some error markers, but this was working the other day. The point I wanted to make was what SAP is able to do is develop our language and our development environment specific capabilities as VS Code extensions, and then deliver them to both the Business Application Studio and to VS Code. And this is a dual benefit to you as our customers and partners, is that you have the choice. If you want to use a hosted browser-based development environment, SAP supplies that and does all the configuration and hosting and persistency of your dev spaces and stuff like that for you. But if you want to do completely local development and install the tools on your own desktop and even be able to do disconnected development, on as you travel or in your backyard, whatever, you can do that with VS Code and the same set of extensions. So the extensions that we're writing here for Business Application Studio, we are also releasing. For instance, here, if I would to search for CDS. You're going to see the cloud platform core data services provided by SAP SE. You're going to see the Fiori tools, Fiori guided development. These the same capabilities that we're writing here for the Business Application Studio, we're also releasing to the Visual Studio Code Marketplace, and making the vast majority of them available here in this environment as well. The really key difference, though, I think, rather than beyond just providing you the setup and configured environment, is the fact that, increasingly we do a lot of development and interaction via the shell, right? The terminal. And I might come here to the terminal and kick off a deployment, for instance, to HANA. And, in the old Web IDE, if anybody had ever used that for HANA development, you might right mouse click on a DB folder and say, build to HANA. And it was a little bit of a black box what it was actually doing. It was taking care of it behind the scenes. It was sending your content over to HANA and running a deployer and things like that. But in the Business Application Studio, what we tried to do is, there was no magic behind the scenes of what it was doing. Say, when you built to send your content to HANA, you could even influence it in the Web IDE, because it was really just running a Node.js module. SAP built the entire HDI deployer, the HANA Deployment Infrastructure deployer, as a Node.js module. And now we publish that module in NPN, in the public NPN registry. I can come here. This is not SAP specific or anything. I just search for SAP HDI. There's the HDI deployer, published in NPN on the internet for the whole world to use. And this is what we've always sort of used behind the scenes, even in the Web IDE, to deploy content to HANA. But we can control this, we can configure this, and we don't need a IDE specific feature built to be able to deploy to HANA. If I want to deploy to HANA, let's just come here and make a little change so that so we'll see this. So I made a change to my Cloud Application Programming Model CDS definition. I'll just rebuild that so it generates the HANA specific artifacts. And then in this environment, if I want to deploy that to the database, I actually don't need any HANA specific capabilities to do that. I can just come here to the command line and do a npm start, and it's going to run this start script from my package JSON, and it's deploying the content into the HANA database. So it's making that change to that particular table, and it's done. But the difference here is this is running in this shell, right? In this little terminal. This terminal is just like a cloud shell provided for you by SAP. This is not running on my local desktop. This is not running in the web browser. It's actually running when we start up these workspaces, these little cloud shells, this little Linux environment provided on Kubernetes, actually, that we scale up and down dynamically and create them dynamically as you need them, as you log on to the Business Application Studio. And it allows you to both do things like this, run an npm script to deploy to the HANA database. That's one example. Or if I want to do local testing, I don't need to deploy something to my target runtime in order to test it. In the Web IDE, if I want to, say, test a Node.js module or a Java module, I have to, you click the run button, and it actually has to package that up and deploy it to Cloud Foundry or deploy it to the XSA runtime if you're doing on-premise development. But in this environment, in this paradigm, I go here to this Cloud Shell and I just say CDS run, for instance. I went up one too many here. Sorry. I got to be in my folder here. How did I get all the way back to home? back into my project folder. There we are. And now, as I was demonstrating, I can just do CDS run, and it's going to start my CDS service locally here in this shell as just a temporary running thing. And this is a little bit of the magic that the Business Application Studio is doing. It's going to even host that to the internet. So now I can just open that service in a new tab, and it's created a little temporary URL for that running service, and it's proxying that service. So I can come here and I can fully test my service. I can debug it as well. You know, I can set a breakpoint here in my code and start the service, and it's gonna run in another tab and open the debugger here in the Business Application Studio. But I've done all this without deploying anything to the cloud platform, without deploying anything to Cloud Foundry or XSA runtime or to Kubernetes itself. This is just temporarily running for me, you know. And when I'm done running that, just Control C to kill it and then move on. Or if I want to run two things, well, maybe before I move on to that, and just to demonstrate, I can do the same thing. Yeah, I'm here. You know, I can do a CDS run. Now it's going to error out over here. I don't have my local HANA instance. I have this pointing to HANA Express, and I have the one in the Business Application Studio pointing to HANA Cloud instance. So I have these configured differently. But just to demonstrate, I could run this locally as well. But now this is running on my local desktop, and I have to have Node.js and CAP installed on my local machine. But then I'm running from a local shell. I'm actually running it on the CPU, you know, on the environment desktop. And this is really a major paradigm shift from the way that we did development in XSA or in the Web IDE full stack, where every time you had a test, you had to do a deployment to the actual development space, the runtime. We get much faster turnaround, much better debug experience without having to remotely connect to a deployed service to debug, with this idea that we just do everything locally here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close the Visual Studio Code. I think I've set up the comparison well enough there that you get the idea that everything that we're basically doing here in the Business Application Studio can also be done locally. But I'll give myself a little more screen real estate now. One thing that I wanted to come back to, I started to say I ran my CDS. Let's just go ahead and do that again. I'm going to do CDS run, and that's going to start my CAP service module. So for my OData services, and you saw that a minute ago when I also did the open in new tab. I'll reopen it. I had the tab open, and then it lets you test your service, right? So I can run a particular OData service. But I also, in this application, this is a typical full stack application. I have an app router, and maybe I want to test the security. I want to test the running it through the app router as well. I can just come here and I can open another terminal window, and I'm just going to go into that app router directory, and I can say npm start. And it's going to run an app router as well. It's going to run on a different port, still inside the same little Linux cloud shell, if you will. Two terminals connected to the same cloud shell. But now I'm running the OData service in one process, listing on port 4004, I think it was. And now I'm running the app router, listening on port 5000. And if I actually look at my configuration of the app router, we'll come back what this default inf JSON is. You can see here, I've set up a destination similar to what you would in the Web IDE with the MTA YAML, but I'm just telling it when I'm testing locally to create a destination that points to localhost 4004. And then the app router will be able to route request within this cloud shell back over to the other service. So we have the ability to not just test one service or one part of our application locally in this environment, but I can do full orchestration of multiple microservices, even with this interaction pattern via destinations that we see in Cloud Foundry. But I'm simulating the whole thing here in this local development environment, once again, without having to deploy anything to the cloud platform itself. And I'll come over here and you see my app router has a little Fiori Launchpad sandbox, and from here I can run UI5 applications that are running against my OData service. Just to prove to you, so these are both running. They're still running. They're good, right? I can still get to the services, but just to prove to you that I've not deployed anything, I'll come back here to my cloud platform, which of course is timed out while I was demoing. All right, we'll give it a second to log back in. And I only have the one sub account. And I will go into my dev space. I only have one dev space. And I will go into my service instances, and you will see what comes up. Oh, not service. I wanted to go to applications. I have nothing running. So I have deployed absolutely nothing to Cloud Foundry itself. I'm completely testing locally within this environment. So I'm isolated. I'm not disrupting others that might be working in the same dev space. I'm perhaps more importantly, not taking up any resources from the Cloud Foundry side. No application runtime resources are needed. Everything is local development here. On the other hand, as soon as I shut down my workspace or stop these running services, then nobody can reach them either. So this is truly local, temporary for just me developing. I still can deploy to Cloud Foundry. However, we still have the MTA YAML, where we would also define our deployment tasks for going to Cloud Foundry and our resource setup. It's just unlike the Web IDE for SAP HANA, we no longer use the MTA YAML when we run at our development time. The Web IDE for SAP HANA or Web IDE full stack would read the MTA YAML because it needed to know all this information because it was doing a little deployment to our dev space in order to test anything. But now we kind of separate the two things. We can add the MTA YAML at the end. We've even brought in the, if you prefer, the form-based MTA YAML editor from the Web IDE. That is here now as well. But then we would package the whole project at the end as an MTAR, and we can deploy that directly from the Business Application Studio as well. If you see here, I am connected to Cloud Foundry. So down here in the bottom left-hand corner, it tells me which Cloud Foundry org and space I'm targeting. I do have multiple set up, so you can connect to different organizations and different spaces. For instance, I'm using my trial, and then it will go to my dev space. You saw I have access to other spaces, so I can switch other spaces, and I do have access to Cloud Foundry right from here as well. I can, for instance, do CF services, and it's going to show me the services in the space that I'm automatically targeting. And I don't have to install the CF command line tool. That was automatically installed as well as part of the Business Application Studio. And so for some parts of this, I'll even show you here, we even have a little graphical view. I can see, for instance, what applications I have deployed and what services I have deployed. And parts of this, even as I'm developing locally, are actually deployed to Cloud Foundry. For instance, my HANA instance, I'm connecting to a HANA Cloud instance. And once again, if I do a CF services, you'll see that I have created HDI container instances in Cloud Foundry. And I did that here via the command line. That's part of what we will add once we have the full HANA capabilities, the Business Application Studio. There will also be the capability via Wizard and via a little box over here on the side to create service instances. But you can do this today simply with the command line. You know, I just did a CF create service, and then it created the service instance. But how this works, how is my application knowing how to connect to that particular HANA service? The little bit of magic, if you will, all comes back to this default env JSON. And this is something that is not new or specific to the Business Application Studio. It's actually been available for local testing of our modules for a while. But what we do here is we use this default env JSON to basically simulate the environment that if we were really deploying our application to Cloud Foundry or Kubernetes, the service bindings would be created. So our Node.js service or our Java service would get bound to an HDI instance. And that binding, all that does, that binding doesn't do anything terribly special. But if you've ever looked, all it does is create an environment variable named VICAP services. And then it injects the credentials and the connection information into that environment variable. And on startup, whether it's your HDI deployer or it's the CAP module or it's your own Node.js or Java logic, your code for the use of SAP libraries and modules is just going out and reading this environment. It doesn't actually communicate with Cloud Foundry or Kubernetes. All it does is read this environment variable. And then, like in the case of connecting to HANA, it makes a JDBC connection to a particular URL and then passes in a certain user and password. And once again, it doesn't get that by going and communicating with Cloud Foundry or doing some secret exchange of credentials or anything. It's just in the environment. And we're able to test locally, both in Visual Studio Code and Business Application Studio, because if you create a file with this particular name, default env JSON, and you put that environment variable, VICAP services, in here, the same way that it appears in Cloud Foundry, then it's going to simulate that environment as though it was bound to a service. Even though there is no service deployment to Cloud Foundry and there is no binding, it's all simulated via this default env JSON file. And that's what makes it possible here. When I do am I in my root? Let me see where I am again. Yeah, I'm in my root. If I do a CDS env, it's reading the environment and it knows the certificate to connect to HANA. It knows the URL to connect to HANA. It knows the port and username. That CDS command that I issued, CDS in env, all that did is go and read this default env JSON, because it's going to look for a default env JSON first, and only then, if it doesn't find it, then will it actually try to read the environment. And this is all logic within CAP, within the Java libraries, within the HANA client, the deployer. All this is looking for a default env JSON. Even the app router uses a default env JSON, can use a default env JSON. And this is just where we can do our destinations. I have examples here of connecting to HANA services, of connecting to user-provided services, of doing service replacements for when you're doing HDB grants. This can all be simulated, if you will, with the default env JSON. And that gives us the ability to do the complete development environment, everything from like HANA deployments to running CAP to Fiori development, app router testing, do all that local testing within the cloud shell here of the Business Application Studio. Couple other things I want to show you here quick. We have templates built in as well. So you can say new project from template. And what this is doing, this is pretty nice. Actually, I'll give you a little more screen real estate here. This is reading, we're actually using Yeoman generators for this. And you can install your own Yeoman generators into the environment as well. If you just come here, just like the VS Code environment, we also have the command palette, and you can issue specific commands from here as well. I give it the, where's it? Oh no, is it not? Let me see here. Nothing. Yeah. Yeoman UI generators. I was spelling it wrong, wasn't I? There. Yeoman UI generators, same capability here. Once again, between Business Application Studio and VS Code. Not only is this the wizard that gives you access to the SAP supplied wizards, all written as Yeoman generators and published, most of them are published on NPN, but then you can explore and install additional generators into your environment. Yes, we have to say, I know that could be going to a third-party site, but then you can search for additional generators. Maybe something that doesn't even have anything to do with SAP development. You can install that wizard via the Yeoman generator into this environment. So we're trying to be very open here as well, and allow you wherever legally possible, but we have a technical base that lets us bring content in from outside and install it here. You can write your own Yeoman generator as well, and install it into this environment. And once you have, these are written as Yeoman generators, like the CAP project generator. It takes you to more information about CAP, but if we were to then just choose that, what it's going to do is it's going to take the Yeoman is normally a command line interface, but what we've done here as a VS Code extension installed in the Business Application Studio as well is we've made that all graphical with a step-by-step walkthrough. So for instance, if I'm creating a new CAP application, give it a name, and what features do I want? Well, I want it to be HANA MTA pipeline, and yeah, go ahead and install sample content in there. That was a relatively simple wizard. I could then open it in a new workspace. But I'm going to stick with my existing application here, because we can also use the wizards and templates. For instance, I could come here and use the Fiori tools as well. I like this guided development for Fiori tools because it takes your project specific context and gives you the ability to say, hey, I've got an object page template and I want to add a new custom action to it. It's like a mixture of documentation, sample code, and the ability, depending on where you are in your project, to even inject code directly into your project. The code necessary to add things to Fiori Elements projects. This is a really cool capability. I also have, I wanted to create a new Fiori application. I think what I want to do here is I thought I could launch it from the menu. If not, I can always come here and I can say, let's just go back to our Yeoman generators. And for instance, in my CAP application, I now want to do a Fiori Elements UI and add it to my existing application. So I'll just come here. What kind of Fiori UI template do I want? Let's say, let's do a list report object page. And now our data sources. So you can connect to an SAP system. In which case I would have configured system destination in my cloud account. I don't have any configured here. I can connect to an OData service, and I can give it the URL of my OData service. This is what I do a lot of times. I'll just start my CAP service and then give it the URL, and it'll pull the metadata out. Or worst case scenario, I can just upload a metadata document as well. Do I have one? I don't have one copied in here. That is one thing here. It's not your local file system, so you'd have to grab the metadata document and upload it here to your Linux file system of the cloud environment. But then you would go on with the wizard, and it would generate into your existing application here. So you have the ability to, like I've done here, I actually added a freestyle application, and I might come into my resources folder and add multiple freestyle applications. The wizards are all set up to be able to support all of that. I also have full Git integration. This project actually comes from Git, so the ability to pull, push, commit, merge to my Git repo. So that's pretty similar to the functionality that we had in the Web IDE, not drastically different in that regard, but now we have a user interface for the Git processing that is identical to what you get in Visual Studio Code. But one of the things that I often do, that's nice if I want to quickly look at what I have in my Git branch, or add a commit, but I can also use Git from the terminal as well. So like I can do a Git clone or Git pull. Now I'm pointed to a private repository. That's why it wants my credentials here, but I can also set up the credentials in the shell environment as well. Now, one of the last things I want to show you before kind of opening it up for questions is this environment is also open for you to be able to install your own tools into the environment as well, additional tools. We saw how we can add other yeoman generators. You can also run yo from the command line and install additional yeoman generators this way as well, or update your generators, and then they will affect the graphical version as well. But for instance, I have a little tool that I developed for HANA developers, a little helper utility for doing HANA development, and I publish it to NPN. And I can come here and I can just do an npm install -G and then install it globally in my entire workspace. So even if I switch between different projects in this workspace, I'll still have it available. And then I just give it the name of the tool that I want to install on a CLI. And this is going to go ahead and install it. So you are not limited to only the tools that SAP provides and pre-installs and configures in your environment. You can add your own tools to the environment as well. So this is now installing and updating the HANA CLI. And I can check it here. Version, yep, looks good. Installed, and now within the context of where I am, this HANA CLI tool will also use the default ENV as well. So for instance, I can come here and I can say HANA CLI system info, and I'm actually seeing the system information for the HANA Cloud instance that I'm connected to. I can do CLI tables, and that shows me all the tables in my HDI container. So, we will add more HANA capabilities to the Business Application Studio over time, but we already have. If there's something that you can do with a command line tool, a utility that's published to NPN, or another sort of public repository, you can certainly pull it down, install it, and use it in this environment as well, even before maybe SAP supplies similar functionality. And likewise here, I can do a HANA CLI. We don't yet have integration with the Database Explorer, which if you were doing HANA development, you probably want to open the Database Explorer as well. We will we will have that in the future, the ability to just like right mouse click on a project and say open Database Explorer. But like right now, the HANA CLI, I can just say HANA CLI open Database Explorer, and it goes and looks up my Database Explorer instance and URL for the environment that I'm in. It won't in VS Code. It lets me open a new tab from the HANA CLI. That's not working here in this environment, but you can just control click and then it does open in another tab. So we do have integration. You can get to pretty easy integration here if you are doing HANA development and say, you remember at the beginning of my demo, I came in here and I actually changed the schema. What did I do? I changed this base column test and I made it test 2, and then I redeployed it. And just to show you back from that original demo, log in. From that original demo, if I come here and I look at my tables, so my HDI container, even though I deployed it from the command line, it's really deployed onto HANA, the HANA Cloud in this case. And we made that change. What was that entity name that I changed? Yeah, base. We come here and we look at base. Then just to prove to you this is all real, I have no smoke and mirrors here. There it is, test 2. Let's just change it again real quick. Let's change this to test 3. Save. Where am I? All right, do a CDS build. Oh. Oh, I misspelled build. That's like, where is that error coming from? Error. We'll do a CDS build and rebuild the artifact. And now npm start to deploy it into the HANA database. Second one changed file. Done. Come over to Database Explorer and refresh that display of that table. That's nice. Refresh display of the table. Here, let's switch back to base. Well, that did not go exactly as planned. There we are. Now, really. All right, let's try this again. Something with the Database Explorer, I think, not refreshing my display. There, and once I clicked off of it and came back. So I think that's purely the UI here in the Database Explorer, not refreshing right. But you see we have changed the name of the column. It is now test 3. So just to prove to you that we're doing full round trip deployment to the HANA database. But yet, if I were to now run this locally, I don't know if my expose base is. No, I'm not exposing that entity. That's just left over from some earlier work I was doing. I was going to show you that it is automatically exposed through the OData service as well, even when running locally. But I think you get the idea there. So that pretty much brings me to the end of the demo portion. I know we wanted to do Q&A. And I know there's some questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to relay them to me or.
Let's have it as interactive as possible. We have all these questions. I will skip some, but let's discuss just a couple of them, at least a couple of them. The first one from me, actually.
Okay.
Is it freeware, the Business Application Studio?
No. There's a trial version that, as I said, is fully featured, that is free. but it has the limitation of you can only have one dev space running at a time, and you can only have 2 total dev spaces.
Okay, and if you need the full-blown version, how much is it? Or is it what, personal or enterprise, or how's this gonna work?
Talk to your local SAP office, because the price varies by region and your contract setup and everything. But yeah, so I'm not in sales. I have no idea, and particularly wouldn't know by region how it varies. But yeah, talk to your local SAP account person.
Yes. Fine. And for another one, what useful SAP web idea from the last version feature is still missing in SAP Business Application Studio?
Well, I think the major things that are still missing are the HANA specific editors. Notice there's no calculation view editor yet. If I would come here and I would come to a calculation view, let's say I've got one here, and I open my calculation view, I get the raw XML. So we're missing the HANA specific editors and some of the HANA niceties, like I'm able to create an HDI container, but I have to do it from the command line. We want to make it so it's also available from a wizard and a context menu as well. But those are the things that we're working on right now, and we're very, very close. I think all the other major scenarios are over here. Now, there could be a little feature here and there where you say, oh, for Fiori development, you're missing this one feature, or you're missing this particular wizard. Yeah, there could be a few other gaps that we're still filling, but I think most of those teams are either really close to completing all of those gaps or have filled them all already.
We have a similar one, and I think it's more or less about the same problem. Do you have any plans to move ADT, Above Development Tools features, to Business Application Studio?
This is probably the most common question I get anytime that I talk about this. And sometimes even when I'm not even talking about this, I get the question about ABAP development tools. No, there are no plans to move ABAP development tools to the Business Application Studio. It currently remains and the BW tooling are remaining for the foreseeable future in Eclipse.
Okay. Not sure that this question from Vyacheslav is for you, but still, let's try. Let's give it a try. You know everything. Build, which is build me, is disappearing or already disappeared. Does it mean that Mendix is significantly more efficient, and then layout editor is something which will replace everything and evolve for consultants or for someone without development skills?
Well, Mendix is a partner offering that SAP does co-sell, and we have some learning materials for it and things like that. It is a solution for low-code development, but I think we also see some emerging SAP own offerings in the low-code, no-code space. We want to invest more in the future in the low-code, no-code space, and I can't make product announcements and stuff like that. I mean, there's some stuff in the roadmap there that I think you'll see more of at TechEd and beyond. But already, if you look at like what we're doing with conversational AI designer, if you look at RUM, SAP RUM, and its workflow builder, and there are some low code, no code scenarios, tooling. Now they're a little domain specific, if you will, but I think what you'll see, yes, build has gone away, and I don't know if something that does exactly the same thing as it that SAP is planning to offer, but expect to see some some future announcements from SAP, some new tooling in the low code and no code space specifically. I think you'll see some exciting new stuff at TechEd in particular.
So there are going to be alternatives to Mendix.
There are going to be other offerings from SAP that also do low code, no code as well.
Okay. Do we need to wait for a local version of Business Application Studio, TEA? Is it the right name?
Yeah,
to migrate. Yeah, to migrate from SAP Web IDE Personal Edition, or there will be plugins for VS Code.
There are plugins for VS Code. I showed that through the demo, and I mean, we may offer someday. I've seen it on some roadmap slides, so I don't have any more details than that. The idea of a Business Application Studio personal or local edition, but really, I think you can do a whole lot with VS Code if you want that local development experience. Local meaning on your own desktop and disconnected and things like that. There's a whole lot of the tooling that we provide as VS Code extensions. The CAP tooling, the Fiori tooling, it's all out there in the VS Code marketplace, and you can install and use it in VS Code. I personally do a lot of HANA development even in VS Code. Now, it's not 100%. Like, we also don't have a calculation view editor for VS Code either. But depending on what you're doing, like I do a lot of CAP development, and then a lot of HANA, SQL script and just regular views. And I do that perfectly comfortable from VS Code. Even last year, when I would travel, I'd be on a plane. I'd fire up my laptop. I'd have my HANA Express locally. I'd use VS Code, and I'd develop all right there with a low footprint kind of environment.
Okay, good, good to know. We have a lot of and questions, but I think just maybe let's have the last one, or maybe two last questions, and then close the event. Does Business Application Studio integrate with Kuma environment?
Oh, with Kima?
With Kima, yeah. Sorry.
Yes and no. So there's not there's not built-in integration like we have, like where I can target the Cloud Foundry space.
Mm-hmm.
But because I have a command prompt and I can install whatever tools I want, I can install kubectl into this little cloud shell, and I can deploy to Kima or any Kubernetes environment, actually, Gardener, AKS, or whatever. I can actually do that from the Business Application Studio. I did some Kima development last week, and I used the Business Application Studio, and I deployed from here, even though there's no specific tooling for Kima in this environment.
Okay. So it's not easy, but it's possible.
Well, I don't even know if I would say it's not easy. It's just not provided. There's no convenience features provided. There's no GUI features. Let's put it that way. GUI. But if you're comfortable doing command line, that's what I love about this environment. It's so open, because if there's a command line tool, I can install it here and I can use it here. It's not like the Web IDE where it was closed and you had to wait for SAP to supply all the tooling. I can bring my own tooling over here. Now, that said, we have some teams working on some features specific to Kima and Kubernetes for the Business Application Server, for the Business Application Studio environment. So that's something that's in our roadmap that we're looking at and playing around with to maybe add some graphical things to make it even easier. But in the interim, there's no reason why you can't do kubectl deployment. And it's YAML deployment files and Docker. All that you can do from this environment as well.
Cool. And maybe the last one, philosophical question, which also came the last one here. Imagine 25 years ago, you were about to go to your first SAP training to Chicago.
Yeah.
And you still have a chance to change this. Would you still connect your life with SAP?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. I've often said I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time to get on that first SAP project. Like I said, I was fresh out of university, had just started with a corporation that was just starting their SAP implementation. In fact, my first day on the job was the SAP implementation kickoff meeting. So I went to an orientation meeting, and then I went straight into the SAP implementation kickoff meeting.
What is R3 at that time?
It was R3, 3.0B.
Okay.
We were cutting edge because we were going to implement 3.0B. Like I said, right place,
No
right
regrets.
time. Yeah, no regrets, because it's a great environment to work in. It's a great community. I can't imagine doing something else.
Yeah, that's great. And then the last step from you, you answered quite a few questions on the first session, and now just select the one you would like to, and we're gonna give a prize to the one who invented the question.
Yeah, wow, there was a lot of good ones. That's tough. I was thinking about that while I was presenting. I mean, I like the ones where people ask about programming language, but go a little deeper, beyond. I kind of like the one, and I'd have to scroll back to find it now. The person who asked me if I could only have one programming language, like you're trapped on a desert island, you can only have one programming language, what would it be? I don't think I've ever been asked that. I mean, a lot of people ask you what's your favorite, but I don't think anybody's ever asked me, you can only have one, what would it be? Because that's tough, because I'm actually a big proponent for learning multiple and then learning between the two. But if you force me to learn just one, well, I had a question back. Well, what am I using it for? for one, I mean, I guess and now that I think about the answer, maybe C++ would be the right answer, because with that you could write your own compiler and create your own programming language or something like that. That would have been more meta. But I actually said ABAP. If your context is SAP ERP/S4, then and I kind of assumed that was maybe the context from the audience, then I would choose ABAP, because that gives you in-app and side-by-side extensibility. But I would not want to give up the other programming languages that I use on a daily basis. So I don't think I'd be very happy being on that desert island, but if I had to, I'm just envisioning this one person sitting on a desert island underneath a palm tree with a laptop that only can connect to one system, right? And that's all they can work on.
I see in the chat that was Pavel, and my congrats to Pavel, and you're gonna have your prize as well. Thomas, many thanks for coming to this event. I hope one day you will come also on site to our events.
That would be great.
It would be great. It would be definitely great. Many thanks for your time. Many thanks for your answers, and many thanks for introduction of the Business Application Studio.
Yeah, thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed.
Yeah, thank you. И спасибо всем, кто присоединился. У нас будет запись этого видео. Вы сможете смотреть это видео тоже на нашем YouTube-канале, а также присоединяйтесь к нашим, в наш Telegram-канал и группу в Фейсбуке. В общем, всем спасибо.
Да,
спасибо всем, до свидания.
Да. Пока.
Спасибо.
Пока.
Все, мы не в прямом эфире.